Radical Love Live is a member of the Quoircast Network. This is Radical Love Live, an ongoing series of conversations with thought leaders exploring faith outside the boxes, hosted by Mark Dilcomb and Kelly Wilson.
Hey, Mark.
Hey, Kelly.
How are you?
I am freaking awesome as always.
That's so good to hear.
How are you, my friend?
I'm good. I'm very good.
Good. So, just an update. You're looking a little bit like the Lebowski now. So, dude.
Yes, this will go down as the summer that Kelly forgot to get a haircut. I'm just too busy. I'm like podcasts and books and stuff going on. And,
well, it's a look that suits you. So, for the folks that obviously don't see that are listening to this via Apple or Spotify, you may not be able to see him, but he truly is starting to look like Jeff Lebowski. So
yeah, I'm aiming for I was aiming for Desert Fathers, but ended up as like
Desert Fathers,
so,
Jeff Lebowski,
urban wastrel. Yeah,
it's all.
So you've been very busy too, right?
I have actually. So I just completed a vision form for Divine All Along. That was an exciting experience. So invited folks in for a preview of what we've got going on throughout 2024 and next year, and give folks a recap of also what we've accomplished. And so got great response from folks. Awesome. This is the first of a series of vision forums that we're going to do with different communities, including faith-based organizations, queer influencers as well. So if anybody wants to know more about what we're doing, go to the website, divineallalong.org. That's divineallalong.org. And go check us out. Thank you for asking about that.
Yeah, definitely really important work that you're doing right now. There's so many people unpacking their religious trauma and so much controversy in many religious spaces about LGBTQ plus people and and inclusion and people wringing their hands when, love is always a choice.
It is so true, especially, as we move forward and really realizing how we embrace everybody that's a part of this from all sides, So, it's more than just saying, our straight allies. These are actually, people who love us and they want to be a part of this as well. Who wants to see people abused by religion, right? Based on flawed theology. And so it's really super exciting to see the kind of the feedback that we're getting from faith communities and how they want to be a part of this as well, especially for those denominations and even non-denominational communities where they feel the pull of love and want to be queer affirming. They're also not quite out. They don't know how to go about doing that, right. And that's where we're going to fill that void to help them on that journey to actually be queer affirming community and create safe spaces where people can heal, but also flourish in their own divinity and reconnect to that.
That is awesome. Yeah. That is awesome. And I'll also put a little plug in for anybody who is in one of those communities where they're going like, we want to be queer affirming, but we're not quite sure how to get around these few Bible verses. Is last month we recorded a 4-part series about LGBTQ plus people and inclusion and the Bible, and directly addressed the 6 verses out of more than 30,000 verses in the Bible that seem to talk about same-sex relationships. So give those a listen.
And I'm glad you brought that out. Yeah, the 6 clobber phrases. And Kelly, thank you very much for doing that. This was an initiative that he mentioned, and next thing I know, he was working on this. So those bonus episodes are there on Radical Love Live, wherever you listen to us or watch on YouTube. So they're out there. You did put them on YouTube.
Actually, I don't have the video up yet.
Okay, strike that back. He's working on that part, but you
was
can't
in my home studio, so the core wasn't quite there yet.
All right, we'll go to Apple and Spotify for now to get to the bonus episodes. So, all right, my friend. Well, we've caught up. I've made fun of you about looking like Lebowski. It's time that we get into our conversation for this episode. Yes, sir.
Yes. And we're excited today. We have Keith Giles with us, who is. He's a writer. He's a co-publisher at Quoir Publishing. He's written. We talked with him not long ago about his recent book, The Quantum Sayings of Jesus. But he has a whole series of books about Jesus, the things that Jesus is not, Jesus on series.
Everybody saying that? I like that.
And he's also he's working round the clock on podcasts these days. Just watched you last night on it's the God Squad, right? Yes,
The God Squad.
so some of the conversations you were having last night, you guys are really getting into it. This is not just like polite, critique of society and how it's handling religion. Like they are.
Are there fist fights?
No, but let's just say that the truth is unvarnished in the way that it is delivered.
Okay.
It was, yeah.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, I was really impressed by the clarity and straightforwardness
I love
of
it.
the conversations. But anyway, we're glad to have you here as always. And we want to talk about some of the things that are going on in the country and the world right now. What you've got on your mind, Keith. So welcome.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for having me back again, guys. It's really fun to be, to return to your podcast and especially to talk about this very important issue.
Yeah. It's good to have you, Keith. Good to see you, my friend. So yeah, we have a bit of an agenda for this particular episode. So I think we should get right on into it. And Kelly, I'll let you get started. Got a couple of quick questions.
The name on everyone's lips right now is Christian nationalism. There's so much conversation going on. And I guess just to get us started, what is Christian nationalism, or how do you define it? I know you've been writing about it a lot lately and talking.
Yeah, actually, yeah. And see, what's interesting, you mentioned my Jesus Un series. The very first book in the Jesus Un series that I published, this is before I even knew it was going to be a series. I thought I was writing one book. It was called Jesus Untangled, Crucifying Our Politics to Pledge Allegiance to the Lamb. The book, I wrote it in 2016. It published on Inauguration Day as Donald Trump was putting his hand on a Bible and being sworn in as president. This book was being made available on Amazon and in stores and things like that. So yeah, I've been writing about this ever since then. Even before that, I did a lot of blog posts about it. And so this is something that I tried to kind of like warn people about back in 2017. Like, hey, everybody, if we're not careful, this entanglement of the evangelical Christian church with the conservative right political party, this might be a bad thing. This could lead to bad things like Christian nationalism. It could lead to bad things like theocracy and things like that. And so maybe we should, pause for a minute and think about what we're doing here. And you can see how well that went over. Everybody listened to me, and the problem was solved. No, actually, no one did. And yeah, we're in this place we are now. So Christian, just to answer your question, I guess to go back in the definition of Christian nationalism, I would say it's an oxymoron, right? To me, it's like they say military intelligence or something like that. It's because it isn't Christian at all. It's not Christian in the sense that it has nothing to do with Jesus. It actually is something that contradicts the life and the ministry and the teachings and the ethics of Jesus. And we can get into that a little bit more later. So it has really nothing to do with Jesus at all. It's not Christian at all. And when I say Christian, I mean Christ-like. It's not Christ-like at all. It's a political movement that would like to and really attempts to use Jesus and the Bible as Jesus as a mascot and the Bible as sort of a club to enforce, some authority behind the things that they believe. And at the end of the day, it's basically about believing, and it's based on the platform of belief, which is also, by the way, a lie, that America is a Christian nation, that America was founded as a Christian nation, that our founding fathers were all Christians, that the framers of the Constitution were Christian, that their intention, although they failed miserably to communicate this clearly, was to create a Christian nation founded on the principles of the Bible. And we've drifted away from that original intention, and their mission now, under this banner of Christian nationalism, is to sort of bring America back to God, to restore the original sort of, Christian foundation of America, and to establish us as a Christian nation, which does translate to America becoming a theocracy, which is something that's very, very dangerous. So I'm very glad, I guess, in one sense, that this topic of Christian nationalism has at last finally become something that everyone knows what this is now. Like when I wrote my book, people were like, "What's that?" And even if people were enmeshed in it, they would deny it. You're like, "Oh, I'm not a Christian nationalist," but then everything they were doing, kind of reflected that they really kind of were. And then I just real quickly, I want to say that because I think this will help frame the conversation we're going to have on this topic, is that I only wrote that book, Jesus Untangled, because I myself had undergone a radical transformation, spiritual transformation. When I was raised, I kind of grew up in El Paso, Texas. I was raised a conservative Christian. I listened to Rush Limbaugh. I voted straight ticket Republican. I was a member of the NRA, owned a bunch of guns. I believed that you could not be a Christian. You could not go to heaven when you die if you voted for a Democrat. That was impossible. Those two things you couldn't be a Christian and be a Democrat. And so I was myself for a very long time. My faith was extremely entangled with my politics. In fact, it was really one of the things that jolted me out of it was what also led to my deconstruction process was this realization that I was more of a conservative Republican than I was a follower of Jesus. I realized that all of the things that I thought were so important were things that Jesus never talked about. And that all of the things that Jesus really did talk about and care about were things that I mostly really didn't concern me. And that was the realization. Like, oh my gosh, who am I following here, really? I went from thinking that you couldn't be a Christian unless you are a Republican or conservative, and suddenly realizing I couldn't see much of Jesus in that position, or really any political position, not just, Republicans, but even the Democrat side. I realized I needed to step away from politics completely and say, I'm going to follow Jesus, and I'm not going to, kind of be swayed by political parties and all that kind of thing. So I wrote that book because I myself had to undergo this very painful process of recognizing, I think I say in the book, I realized that you can't convert a culture if that culture has already converted you. And I had been fully converted to the culture of Americanism, right? As an American sort of rah-rah flag waver. And I'm more a citizen of this nation than I was of the kingdom of God.
Wow. That's such a great way to think about it. I mean, I know that the phrase Jesus is Lord is specifically a jab at Caesar, because Caesar would go, they had to claim that Caesar was a king and a god.
That's right.
Yep.
You look like you were gonna ask something.
So Keith, I know you a bit, and we've been in conversation before. I've not heard, or I don't remember you saying this part of your journey where you actually had to untangle your politics in order for you to come back to Christ and what your faith is all about. And that's a powerful testimony to your own experience in that. Yes, my observation is to see that in our culture, that's exactly what's taking place. But what was the epiphany? How did that come where you just said, I have to do this? Was there a moment?
Oh, there was a moment. There isn't always a moment, but there was definitely a moment in this situation. It's one of those things where, Jesus talks a lot about how you could always see the speck in your brother's eye, but you don't notice the plank in your own eye. This is exactly what happened. So I was walking around with this massive, Christian nationalist plank in my eye that I didn't know was there, but I noticed the speck in my parents' eyes. I was on a phone call with them. So we had moved from, my wife and I got married in El Paso, Texas, but we moved to Orange County, California. We had a couple of boys, had a couple of kids, and we're raising them. And I was on staff at a church, vineyard church that we'd helped to plant at the time. And, on the weekends we call our parents and talk to them on the phone and all that stuff. So I had talked to my mom and dad like a couple of weeks prior to this, and they had given me this really great news at the time, which was that a lifelong friend of ours, a friend of the wife of a coworker of my dad's and one of my mom's best friends, her name was Phyllis. that she had gone to church with my parents and that she had gone forward, given her life to Christ. It was like, oh my gosh, wow, how great Phyllis is a Christian. I mean, that was so great. So a couple of weeks go by. Now I'm on the call with my mom and dad. We're actually finishing the call. We're actually hanging up the call. And I remembered, I wanted to ask, hey, how's Phyllis doing? What's going on with Phyllis? And it gets really quiet. And I'm thinking, oh, what happened? And my dad says, yeah, Keith, I don't think she's really a Christian. I don't think she genuinely, became a Christian. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what happened? Like, did she do something horrible? Like, what did she do? What's going on? And he says, yeah, we were talking to her and we found out that she voted for John Kerry in the election. She didn't vote for George W. Bush.
Oh,
and
my
he
God.
said that. And I said, Dad, you know that, there's going to be more than just Republicans in heaven, right? And I didn't really convince him. But when I hung up the phone, I was like so shocked by their reaction that then I started asking myself, like, well, wait a minute. I've talked that way too. I've acted that way too. So that was the first kind of like thing that shocked me to stop and have me sort of interrogate myself of those kind of things. So that was the first sort of thing that helped me kind of open my eyes to it. It wasn't a one and done because like I still had things to work out. I started writing a series of blog posts. I think I wrote about 7 or 8 series of 7 or 8 blog posts. I had a couple of friends of mine that joined me that also contributed a couple to that series as well. And that series, of course, was all about this, right? It's like what you were saying, Kelly, exactly about recognizing that, in the early church, actually back it up to Jesus, right? The temptation that Jesus faces in the desert, Satan offers him political power and Jesus refuses.
He rules this world.
That's right. And so, and then Jesus, let's keep going. Then Jesus tells his disciples, not once, but twice, pointing first to a political hierarchy. He says, look at the Gentiles, the rulers of the Gentiles, how they lord it over them. Not so with you. And then a second time, he points to a religious hierarchy and says the same thing. Look at how the religious leaders lord it over one another. Not so with you. You will not do this. You will not enforce power over other people, which is exactly what politics is all about. And you can go on and on. Like Jesus was very much resistant of all this kind of stuff. And what that created in the early church was this sentiment that the empire, the kingdoms of this world, that was the enemy, right? We would not pledge allegiance to Rome. We will not hail Caesar. We will not say that Caesar is Lord. In fact, we will be skinned alive, burned alive, crucified upside down, tortured to death. And the only thing in our lips will be that Jesus is Lord. And that was an emphatic statement that therefore Caesar is not. And so, yes, it was a radical thing. And we even see also in the early church, some early church fathers, there were rules, right? If somebody wanted to come to the fellowship and share in the Eucharist, and join the meetings and become a follower of Jesus, pledge themselves to Christ. If they were either a soldier in the military or a member of a political office, they had to renounce those things if they wanted to join. So you could not do that. It was in their minds, it couldn't happen. Tertullian famously had said something about how someone is floating the idea of if Caesar could be a Christian, and he said, as if Caesars could be Christ followers. Again, in their minds, that's impossible. These are two different kingdoms. You cannot do both of these things. And so it's a very radical idea. And so I looked at that. I started looking at that and reading those early church fathers when it came to that kind of stuff and realized like, oh my gosh, yeah, I have pledged allegiance to the empire. I have tried to mix those two things. So anyway, that was really helpful to me. But then also if you continue to study church history, you run into Constantine. And that's at the point where initially this thing really starts. I mean, that's the beginning of what we know today as Christian nationalism. Constantine introduces the idea that you could be a follower of Jesus and also, a citizen of the empire. And he does it in a subtle way, but because prior to Constantine, the evidence that you were a follower of Jesus was your orthopraxy, right? people would see, oh, you care about the poor, you care for the widow and the orphan, you share what you have with people in need, you're nonviolent, you love your enemy, you love your neighbor. Oh, that says to me, you must be following Jesus. And that's all it was. That's all it took, was to see that you were living all your life in a Christ-like way. You were following the way. What Constantine does is he shifts it to be, no. What makes you a Christian is, do you believe these things? He makes it about orthodoxy. And so now, as long as you believe these things, you can do whatever you want. You can commit any actions you want, because we've defined being a Christian now by agreement with a set of doctrines and beliefs, and not about your actions. And that makes it easier to sort of make Christians loyal to the empire.
Wow. Thank you for doing that, Keith, because to hear the history and where it started, because myself, until you just shared this, I look at Christian nationalism as being a very 20th or 21st century thing. And you're, no. You need to go back about 1700 years.
It's a whole Roman Empire.
Was based on the entire notion. So instead of it, they had their own form of it because of Constantine. So, we do see this in certain denominations of the Christian tradition, especially here in the U.S.
Yes.
Where that's exactly right. Anything that you do is justifiable, because as long as you carry out your belief and hold on to that, that reigns greater than any action that you have. And then it feels like you can always ask for forgiveness if you go too far. There's always you always have an out as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Now, you're right, though, that it is in America specifically, there's been a sort of a resurgence of this, and it's not accidental. There's been a plan by different people. There's a guy named Kevin Cruz, KRUSE. He has a book called One Nation Under God. I quote him in Jesus Untangled, but he does an excellent job of sort of documenting historically kind of how we ended up where we are. In the 1950s, there was a movement to create a solidarity between Christians and corporations, so they could basically frame it as a way that both would see big government, quote unquote, as a common enemy. This is where they started introducing in 1956, "In God We Trust" was the national motto. It's where they added the line in 1954 to the Pledge of Allegiance, "One Nation Under God," because it wasn't in the original one, and things like that. And so the goal was, I'm going to quote here from his book. The goal was to entangle Christianity with Republican politics in order to benefit big business. And then he says this: "The reason corporations start making this argument about freedom under God is that it's a much more effective way to push back against the regulatory state and the labor unions. It's no longer businessmen making the case for business, it's Christian ministers." And there are specific Christian ministers that they highlighted. One of them was a minister who pastored a church. His name was Reverend Fifield in Los Angeles. He had a congregation mostly made up of millionaires. And he was one of the most effective ministers in this movement. And to do this, Cruz talks about how his sermons basically disregard all of Christ's warnings about the dangers of wealth, because Jesus, of course, does speak a lot about this.
Of course.
He disregards
all your stuff and go feed the poor.
That's right. That's right. So he never preaches that. He never mentions Jesus saying anything like that. He also completely disregards the injunction to look out for other people, to care and love your neighbor and that kind of thing, to be your brother's keeper. Disregards all of those kinds of messages. And he creates a Christian faith that is very individualistic. It's just between you and Jesus. It's just you and God. And again, we see that, we know that, right? I grew up with that mentality my whole life.
Right. It's just hunker down until either Jesus or the rapture comes, and then, and then you fly off to heaven.
That's right. And so it's kind of that movement intentionally began in the 1950s. And of course, we know, because I lived through this, and I think you guys did too, in the 1980s with Ronald Reagan and the moral majority. That was sort of the next surge of this thing. And the religious right and moral majority and all that.
Yes, Ralph Reed.
Yeah.
Paul and all those guys.
Yeah. And that's kind of what has led us to where we are now today, where it's just gotten to the point where people, again, I'm not the only one. I'm not the only Christian who is more entangled in their politics than they really are following Jesus.
No, you're not. And again, if we think, what is a Christian today? That's a hard question to answer. Like
there's so many varieties.
Yeah.
You know, there's popular Christianity. We talked about that with
Yes, we did.
Pierce Marks a couple of weeks ago about that word.
Either. Yeah.
You know, because when you say Christian to a bunch of people who aren't Christian, they can tell you what they think Christian is. And it's that kind of like stereotypical, like, oh yeah, the self-righteous people who tell us what to do all the time and want to like put on
That's usually not complimentary.
Will tell us to go to hell if we're not following the rules.
Saved, all this stuff. Yep.
But you know, you go into individual churches and there's different definitions of it.
Well, it is. But then there is, so not long ago we had a conversation with Tom Ward about the word Christian as well. And, my personal feeling is like, let's give that word up and let them keep it. And he argues, no, let's not do that because, because it in of itself is not a bad word. It's just being used for purposes that are not Christ-like. So that's where Tom's point is. No, we should take the word back. Okay. Then I'll let him take that up as his challenge. But, Keith, to your point and what you just shared, you're absolutely right. Everything is intersected in this way for these particular reasons that it really is about power and control and manipulation and all of these for everything that are not Christ-like. And we are at a moment of reckoning, I believe. Like and what is your feeling? Like, what is the next breakthrough? What happens after this moment? Is it just going to get worse?
I hate to say it, but it seems like it might get worse. We're really now sitting, and this is honestly, again, I guess when I wrote Jesus Untangled, again, going back to 2016, 2017, and I had this personal epiphany. A lot of what I argue for in that book is for Christians to just, and that's why I called it Untangled, to just untangle themselves completely. Like, just get out of this political game. Stop trying to influence change in the world, the kind of change you want to see through political means. Like, if you really believe in Jesus, if you really believe that Jesus knew what he was talking about and the gospel has power to transform people from the inside out, not just make rules and laws that they have to follow on the outside, whether or not they want to on the inside, that the gospel that can transform people on the inside to become the kinds of people who don't desire to do those kinds of things, right? Then go all in on the gospel and you know what I mean? Like, I felt like that the desire to sort of bring the kingdom of God through political means was a way of saying that they had lost all confidence and faith in Jesus and his way of doing it. They were just going to do it sort of we're going to do it Constantine's way. We're not going to do it Jesus' way, right? So, but now, and that's what I did personally, I'll just say, by the way. So, and I took a lot of flack for that in that book, because essentially what I was saying is, don't vote anymore. There's no point in involving yourself in the political process. Oh, wow. To completely, just step away from it. And I did at that time. I will say, though, I broke my rule when Donald Trump was running for president the second time, because after the first round, first 4 years of Trump, I realized, oh, this guy is really dangerous. And so I want to make sure we don't have another 4 years of this person. So I broke my rule and I voted against him in the previous election.
Yeah.
And so now I'm at a place where I'm realizing that things have gotten so bad. This Christian nationalism, the threat of Christian nationalism, the threat of a Christian theocracy is now, we are literally standing on the threshold of this becoming a reality. We are literally a few months away, literally like 4 months away from the possibility of living in an America that you will not recognize, where there is no more sort of equal protection under the law, where there is no more freedom, equal freedoms for everybody, where there is no more true democracy. And I say this because of something called Project 2025. And that's also something that, I mean, it's the most searched term right on Google, I think last week, after a couple of celebrities spoke out about it. And I'm grateful for that, just to kind of bring it to people's attention. And so I am now doing something that I hadn't done for a long, long time, which is I'm now spending a lot of my time and energy speaking out against Project 2025, trying to let people know about what's happening, about the fact that Christian nationalism is just about to gain complete power. And when I mean complete power, I mean they already kind of have the Supreme Court, and they kind of already have, at least they have the Speaker of the House and a lot of congressmen in Congress right now. And if they also then get the executive branch, there will be no stopping them, because things have already happened and without a conservative president in the White House that are terrifying. I mean, we've already seen the Supreme Court hand the president essentially dictatorial powers, giving him immunity. We've seen local state governments mandating that the Bible be taught in public schools and that the Ten Commandments be on display in public schools. Again, these are steps towards Christian nationalism and Christian theocracy. And they've already made incredible gains and incredible steps in this direction without the help of the executive branch. If they get the executive branch, Project 2025 is a manifesto to fast forward and green light unbelievable sweeping changes that will essentially, in a way, it will basically mean that there won't even be a need to even go through the charade of another presidential election, because the president will be the president for life.
Can I ask you a question? Like, there's I got so many things going on here, but I've understood for some time that how using Christianity as a wedge and a way to garner votes has benefited business, and how it's benefited political parties. Like, we're going to put something out there that's really, we're going to make abortion like the very worst crime in America, like the very worst burning problem, so that everybody, that droves of people will go to vote just for that. And then we're going to go ahead and throw away the environment and away all regulations for business or whatever. What's the end game for actual Christians who are devoted to this? Because you talked about the law not being able to really transform people. Paul made a big deal about that.
Yeah, exactly.
The law would make you righteous. And a lot of these people think the world is ending pretty soon. So what's the point of all?
Yeah. Well, the great question. It's a really great question. There isn't an answer that makes any sense, because you're asking them to be logical about what they're doing. I mean, I agree with you. I would love to ask them that. If you really believe that, Jesus is coming back any day now, and he's going to set up his kingdom on earth, and he's going to do all this stuff, then, why are you resisting what you think, according to them, the godless liberals want to do all these horrible things? Yeah. Wouldn't that make him come back faster? You would think you just step back, let it happen, and then Jesus will come back and
Antichrist step in and
you kill all of them. Yeah, exactly.
Maybe they're building the infrastructure for it. Just be like,
yeah, it's I think what it is at least in my opinion, it's tipping their hand that they don't really have, as I said earlier, they don't really have faith that Jesus is going to change the world. They don't really have faith that the gospel has any power. They don't really believe that God can do these things. Their God is very small. Their God desperately needs them to organize, create bills, elect government officials, put people in places of power. It's all on them. They have to be the ones to create this. They have to do it all themselves, and their God needs them to do it. And this isn't new, by the way. When
that's so true. That is so true what you just said, Keith. That's so true.
Yeah.
It's an impotent God, and they are the ones that affect what God is going to then fulfill. They drive it.
Yes. One of my favorite quotes, and I was looking for it actually before we jumped on. I couldn't find the actual quote, but Roger Williams is one of my heroes. He was a Christian minister in Rhode Island. He actually founded Rhode Island. The state of Rhode Island was kind of created by him. And he would, so in the colonies, this was before we were even a nation, when they were still under the colonies, he wrote incredible letters back and forth with other Christian ministers, and these Christian ministers wanted to create a theocracy. They wanted to, and well, they ran a lot of their colonies that way, right? You were kicked out of the colony if you weren't a Quaker or Puritan or whatever. And that's a part of American history people don't even know about. Like Puritans and Quakers killed each other. Christians killing other Christians because they disagreed over theology.
Yeah.
Knowing Quakers now, that seems so.
No, it's shocking, isn't it?
Quaker.
But anyway, Roger Williams, in one of his letters to arguing with one of these Christian ministers who was saying that no, we must elect these godly leaders. We need to have Christian leaders in places of authority, as mayors and governors and whatever, presidents and things like that. And Roger Williams' response was, if this is true, I think he says, if godly leaders are so necessary to the accomplishing of God's will in the world, look how poorly God has provided such leaders. And I'm like, in other words, it's self-evident. If you want to say that God requires godly leaders to accomplish his means, you're saying that God, to this point, has never accomplished his will because we have never had a godly leader, right? They've all been corrupt. So, what are you talking about? This is ridiculous. The concept fails on its own merits.
Yeah. And now the idea is we need a leader who's a bull in a china shop, and then we'll take advantage of their chaos to implement agenda.
And look how crazy that is, right? They've gone from saying, no, we need a godly Christian leader in office, to now saying, we're not electing a pastor in chief. We don't care, right? He could be the worst person in the world. Well, look at King David, right? He was an adulterer and he murdered Uriah. Okay, then, it's crazy now. Like now they're like saying, give us Barabbas, basically. Give us Barabbas. Because he's promising to give us power, and there's your giveaway. What they want is power. They want political power. And that's the thing that Jesus refused.
Absolutely. And you bring this to exactly to the point. It is always going to be about power because they are so blinded by it, and they use the trappings of the faith as their excuse to empower. But it's obvious when explained as you just did.
Yes.
And the other thing is, it's like, how do you even call yourself a Christian at that point?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is really the problem. And again, this problem goes back before even Christian nationalism was the threat that it is now. That's something else that I've been writing about and talking about for a long time. But it goes back to my own experience, right? I was raised in a Christian, environment where the only thing necessary to be a Christian, this is what's communicated, this is everyone's entry point. Like most everyone's entry point to the Christian faith is something like this, right? You're in a youth group or something, or maybe you're even just in a Sunday morning church service. Raise your hand if you don't want to burn in hell for eternity. I see that hand, brother. Now repeat this prayer after me, a prayer that doesn't appear anywhere in the scripture. Amen. And now, ding, magically, you are a Christian. And as we said, that has nothing to do with following Jesus. You just now get to go to heaven when you die. And anything you do, well, just come back to church on Sunday, confess your sins, Jesus will forgive you, and go back to live your life any way you want. Dallas Willard, who I love, Dallas Willard used to say that kind of Christianity, those Christians are what he called vampire Christians. He says, because they only want enough of Jesus' blood to get to heaven, but they have no intention of following him. And what they say is, thanks for the blood, Jesus. I'll see you when I get to heaven. And from that point until they die and go to heaven, they want nothing to do with Jesus. They have no intention of following Jesus or following his teachings. And that is so antithetical to what Christianity should be all about, right? So when you have churches, we have millions of people in churches across America sitting in the pew, and that was their entry point. I'm a Christian. Why? Because I prayed a prayer. Why? Because I didn't want to burn in hell forever. And what does it mean to be a Christian? It means that I prayed that prayer. Okay. Now, are we shocked that those people don't act like Jesus? Well, in other words, if the entry point looked different, what if the entry point was this? raise your hand if you want to live your life the way Jesus told you to. What if you raise your hand if you want to follow Jesus in every day of your life? Raise your hand if you want to love your neighbor as yourself. Raise your hand if you want to care for the widow and the orphan. Raise your hand if you want to love your enemy. Raise your hand if you want to follow the Sermon on the Mount. If that was your entry point, you would at least have Christians who understood that the point, that the goal in being a Christian, a Christ-like person, is to model and mirror the life and teachings of Christ. But that's not the way it's defined, and that's not the entry point. And I think that's the problem. That's why these people who are now all about political power, of course they can say they're a Christian, because no one's ever told them that being a Christian was anything other than that, right? I just believe the right things, and I prayed the prayer, and that's what makes me a Christian. Never mind that nothing that I do has anything to do with Jesus, right? And it hold people's feet to the fire on the political side of things. When they say I'm an evangelical Christian and I'm a conservative Republican, then say, okay, which of the specific teachings of Jesus inform your beliefs and policies? They can't name one because there isn't one, right? They do, because they're not basing anything on what Jesus said. They're basing it on what their church says or what their political leaders have told them.
What's difficult for me is that I also come from a conservative evangelical, actually we called it fundamentalist background, that seeing communities that intuitively do some things that are Christ-like, where they do help feed in their own community, or some little old lady needs a roof fixed and people come for whatever, but then don't see the incongruity between this and this political allegiance,
right?
That is the complete opposite. It's frustrating for me. I want to be up in the middle of their service and say, hey, wait a minute.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, no, you're right. And thank you for saying that too. I think that's balanced, because even when I was an evangelical pastor at churches and stuff, we did do a lot for the poor. In fact, that was my job. I was the Compassion Ministries pastor. I had American Express Gold card in my wallet from the church, and I was given complete freedom. If I saw someone that needed food or clothes or shoes, I could do that. And I did that. And no one ever said, Keith, you're doing that too much, cut back on doing that. So, and then not every church does that, but our church did do that. And I really appreciated that they did that. But at the same time, I think there's still this mentality that's missing, right? There's this, we've missed, Christianity in America has missed the fact that it's supposed to be based on Jesus specifically. Because even in those cases, a lot of times, I would just say based on one of the sermons that I grew up hearing my whole life, I didn't hear a lot of Jesus sermons. I heard a lot of Paul sermons, right? They really like Paul. Jesus makes them nervous, right? Jesus makes them nervous because now Jesus talks almost completely about the orthopraxy, right? How are you living your actual life? How are you treating people around you and loving your neighbors and those kind of things? And Paul's, you can get some distance because he's just talking about theology and doctrine and things like that.
Right. Yeah. And, one of the things that kind of blew my mind when I really started studying the Bible in earnest, rather than just accepting what I was getting from the pulpit, was rereading the Gospels and rereading them as though I didn't know anything else about like any of the rest of the New Testament. That Jesus doesn't talk about getting saved.
Yeah.
Like, to me, it was all about like, I get saved, I get my fire insurance. But Jesus is talking about the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God, depending on which gospel you're looking at. And I always thought, that's that like faraway heaven where you're on a cloud. But he was talking about like the reign of God, right
exactly
now.
Right.
I was really attracted to. I was like, finally, like Christianity I can dig. But I was like, this is nothing like what I.
No, you're right. You're right.
That's not some sort of flex that you're going to go after you die. No, you're right in the middle of it at this very moment, by the way.
That's right. No, thank you for that. And that was the big epiphany for me. That was the final linchpin in my deconstruction movement was, someone pointed out to me as a pastor of a church, or one of the pastors on staff at a church, pointed out to me that that the gospel wasn't about saying a prayer so you can go to heaven when you die. And I was stunned. I was like, it's not? And he said, no. My friend who was talking to, he said, no. He said, you know, it seems so elementary now, but at the time it was news to me. He said, you know, the gospel, you would find the gospel in the part of the book called the Gospels. You know, that's why they're called the Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And if you turn to the Gospels, Jesus is the one who tells you the good news. That's what gospel means. The good news of the kingdom. And what does he say it is? The kingdom of God is within you. The kingdom of God is here now.
Amen.
That's the radical thing. Like you said, it's not in the future. It's not coming soon. He even says that. If someone tells you it's over here, it's over there, it's coming here, it's coming there, don't listen to them. They don't know what they're talking about. He's saying it's here right now. It's among you. It's within you. And you can live in it right now. And so that was it. That was the bomb that dropped that just I say, rearranged the spiritual furniture in my life, my mind and heart and everything. Because I thought to myself, oh my gosh, if I'm wrong about the gospel, what else am I wrong about? And it turned out I was wrong about almost everything.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah,
That's
Keith,
really,
you have been extraordinary on this.
yeah. I'd love to continue this conversation, just like have a whole conversation about the kingdom.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's a good reason to bring Keith back for another episode.
Yeah.
I'm game.
Okay.
I just got an email from our next guest. He's running a little bit late.
Okay.
So we're rushed.
So are we in bonus round with Keith then?
Bonus round.
All right, bonus round. Okay, so can I pick up the thread that you just put down there? So you had this epiphany. You are a pastor.
Yeah.
You have been pastoring for some time, and you had studied the Gospels, and you had studied the rest of the Testaments, and you came to like a realization that, the kingdom is right here, right now.
Yeah.
You had never considered that before.
No one had ever talked to me like that. No one had ever communicated the gospel like that ever.
That blows my mind.
Yeah. When Jesus talks about the kingdom of God, it's like that, mansion and streets of gold and all.
Yeah, that's when you die. That's later.
That's
later.
Yeah, and the idea that it was here now was a huge shock. And then that's when I discovered Dallas Willard. So the guy that told me that was actually a friend of Dallas Willard's. And he recommended I read The Divine Conspiracy. And I was writing interviews for Relevant Magazine at the time. So I interviewed Dallas Willard twice. And a couple of those interviews are in print. And he was so gracious, such a great guy. And he really helped me in those conversations understand this idea of the kingdom being, here and now, that what Jesus was asking you to do was to follow him. And that it was about, he uses kingdom, metaphors and this idea of in other words, like before you enter the kingdom, each of us individually, we're wearing the crown on our own head. We're the ruler of our own life. And Jesus is saying, if you want to enter the kingdom, you have to lay down your crown, or you have to submit yourself to Christ, right? And this is the taking up your cross and dying to yourself. And then every single day waking up and saying, okay, Jesus, what are we doing today? And I'm going to follow Christ every day of my life. And that was just a radical shift for me, but a powerful one, right? It really changed everything for me of like, how do I do this? And then as I started to do that was when I started recognizing, it was only after that. And now I'm trying to follow Jesus. And I started realizing, well, I'm doing a lot of things and I believe in a lot of things. And I say a lot of things that are not things that Jesus cared about, right? And that's when I started touching my politics and things.
So as Christians, or even because we have plenty of listeners who are not Christians as well, seeing this looming possibility of theocracy.
Yeah.
What are some things we can do? Or is it really just that, we should pray and just embody Christ-like values as much as we can and try to cut, be Jesus here? Yeah.
Well, I wish there was a simple answer to that. I wish I could just say, everybody do this and it'll fix it. I don't know. I feel like we're so far down the road right now. And I hate to say that, one thing you can do is just don't vote for Donald Trump. Although that would at least delay this Project 2025 plan from going into effect because it requires there to be a conservative president. But the thing is, even if you do that and Biden, whoever it ends up being, the nominee for the Democrats, if Trump loses the election, all they're going to do is reset the clock for another 4 years and try again on the next election. That won't really, it kicks the can down the road. It's not really going to solve the problem. It'll delay it, right? We are still, unfortunately, living in an America where there are people that believe America was a Christian nation. They're still very motivated to force us to become a Christian nation. And, there are people pushing back. The ACLU is doing a lot of work to try to overturn some of these things. But it's hard to do when you have a Supreme Court that's stacked in such a way that they seem very motivated to kind of make this thing happen. And I'll say the other thing that's frustrating about this too, I talk about this in Jesus Untangled. There's a study that was done by Princeton where they looked at 20 years of data to answer the question, how much does the will of the people influence Congress? And what they realized after looking at 20 years worth of data was that the answer was it didn't. In fact, I'm going to quote from the study. They said, the preferences of the average American appear to have only a minuscule near zero statistically non-significant impact upon public policy. In other words, it doesn't matter what the people want. That's not, oh, I know that guy. It doesn't matter what the people want. That's not how Congress is going to vote. Now, even though the American voter and taxpayer, we're voting them in and we're paying our taxes, right? But we have no influence over the decisions that they make. However, the study did find there is one group that is incredibly influential on the decisions that Congress makes, and those are billionaires and corporations who pay almost no taxes. So that's the bad news, right? We really don't have a government by the people, for the people, and of the people. And so that makes it much more difficult, I think, for us as individual citizens who don't want this to push back. I think we can be vocal. I think, of course, do your job, contact your congressmen, your senators, let them know, your representatives, that you don't want this, that you think this is wrong. It can contribute to organizations that are trying to fight these kinds of things. But it's going to be an uphill battle. I don't know that there's a way. In fact, it may be an inevitability. Again, I hate to say that. It sounds so pessimistic, but the definition of a pessimist is an optimist with experience. And so I'm a bit pessimistic in that sense because I don't know at this point if there's a way to completely turn it around. I think it's always going to be a battle between people that are Christian nationalists who are convinced that this is what America should be, and the people that are resisting and say, no, this is not what we want.
Well, it's a somber,
sorry to leave everybody in such a happy note.
mindful note.
Yes.
Yes. But, I want to thank you for all the insights. I think people are going to really get a lot out of this.
Keith, my friend, blessings to you. Thank you very much for your wisdom that you shared with us. We're going to end this episode here so we can wrap it up. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening to this episode of Radical Love Live, hosted by Mark Dilcom and Kelly Wilson. Recorded at the Bravery Studios in Garfield, New Jersey. All rights reserved. Find our episodes on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. And check us out at radicallovelive.com, along with our personal websites at markdilcom.com and kellywilson.com. This is Radical Love Live, where we explore faith outside the boxes.